In Nebraska, it's estimated we have 1.9 million acres of wetlands. There are three factors that make an area a wetland: vegetation, or the type of plants growing there, and then the second factor is the soils, and then the final factor is hydrology, or the presence of water. And when you have all three of those line up, that area would be classified as a wetland. Sandhills is the place we have the greatest density of wetlands in Nebraska. So our estimates are there are over 1 million acres of wetlands present in the Sandhills. It include lakes and fens and marshes and even alkali wetlands. And that's supported by the underlying Ogallala Aquifer, which contains over 1 billion acre-feet of water. Ranching and wetlands are very connected. Most of the Sandhills is privately owned ranch land. The ranchers are great stewards of the Sandhills. Globally, sandhill wetlands are really important as migration stopovers for a variety of different wildlife species. So it's a fascinating place with this abundance of wildlife to provide all of these different benefits to people, from recharging the Ogallala Aquifer to providing a place for recreation and a source of habitat for fish and wildlife. So that's what really makes the Sandhills a unique and an amazing landscape.
It has the most awesome sunrises and sunsets. I don't know how else to describe it. I'll be out on a lake and I'll hear leaf bitterns echoing off on the side, and this incredible sunrise at the same time. It just gives you goosebumps. So Sandhills are the southernmost breeding habitat for waterfowl. These wetlands provide a lot of habitat for migrating waterfowl, as well as resident waterfowl that breed here. We have a lot of grassland that surrounds these lakes and wetlands, and it provides a lot of nesting habitat for mostly duck species, geese species, and then our trumpeter swans put nests on muskrat huts, which are quite abundant. So wetlands provide much habitat, especially for breeding birds.
One of the big problems is common carp, which are not native to the United States. They were introduced as actually kind of a game fish, and where they have become established, they can be very detrimental to wetlands. They disturb the bottom of the wetland, they consume some of those plants, but also they just rile up the water and make it go from a clear water state to a very turbid or muddy water. And what that does is it alters then the native plants and animals that rely on that wetland having fairly clear water. And when that happens, really the biological productivity of these lakes declines just drastically.
My job is to assess those lakes that have carp in them and lakes that do not have carp in them, to determine how that affects water bird use, abundance, and diversity. We do what we call a vantage point survey. And so we have set points along a lakeside at elevated areas, and we scan the lakes and count all the water birds that we see on the lake from each point. Lakes without carp have significantly higher abundance of water birds and waterfowl, as well as diversity that use those lakes and wetlands. Nebraska Game and Parks, as well as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, and the Sandhills Task Force are partnering to remove carp from several of the lakes here in the Nebraska Sandhills.
The Sandhills Task Force is a small nonprofit organization that's rancher-led with the goal of promoting ranching and conservation in the Sandhills region of Nebraska. We work on eastern red cedar removal and prescribed burning. We'll also help with wetland work, either through stream and wetland rehabilitation or lake renovations, where we remove the invasive carp out of the lake. To renovate that lake, the first thing that we do is we put in a structure to make sure that the lake is isolated in the fact that we don't want carp to come back upstream. After the structures are in place and we feel like carp will not find their way back into the lake, then we will work with partners to lower the lake if that's possible and apply rotenone, which is a chemical derived from plants in the Amazon, and it works to kill off the fish that are present. After the rotenone gets broken down by the sunshine in a pretty natural process, the lake will be restocked with desirable fish. Ranchers are interested in lake renovations because they holistically care about their land and their resources. Conservation needs to be done in this area so that it's complementary to ranching. And thankfully, what's good for livestock in the area is generally good for wildlife habitat.
Historically, we had huge herds of bison, also elk, deer, pronghorn that were native grazers on this landscape. The Sandhills requires grazers to sustain the vegetation, both in the uplands and in the wetlands. Some people just say, well, why don't you just let it go idle, just take all the cattle off, and just allow it to be natural. Well, first off, that wouldn't be natural because these prairie and wetland systems evolved under grazing.
We as a society thrive upon our healthy water resources, and the Sandhills is very abundant with healthy water resources. And so we need to do our best to keep from having these invasive populations take over, whether it's fish or plants. They threaten the native species that should be here.
The Sandhills are like mountains in Nebraska. They are mountainous sand dunes with wetlands peppered in between. The Sandhills are magic. A Blanding's turtle is a semi-aquatic species. They're easy to identify. They don't look like any other turtle in Nebraska. They have a high domed carapace, so they look like a helmet, and they have a very long neck, and along the bottom side of that neck and on their chin, they have a bright yellow coloration. They have that curvature on their upper lip, and so they look like they're always smiling. Blanding's turtles are important to the wetlands for a lot of reasons. I mean, I'm a little bit biased because I am a Blanding's turtle researcher. Female Blandings. This is number 26. So she has the radio transmitter so that I can find her again. This is a really productive wetland. I have caught a majority of my turtles at this site. So I currently have 7 adult Blandings with transmitters on here. And that's the most I've ever had at a site, so that's pretty exciting. They have their part just like anything else in the wetland, so they're helping to control the crustacean and insect populations in our wetlands, as well as they move between wetland habitats, they carry some vegetation with them, and so they're helping to spread seeds and they help with plant biodiversity. The number one threat to Blanding's turtles are us. We alter and drain wetland habitats, and that is detrimental to the species. So like all turtles, Blanding's turtles are experiencing declines throughout their distribution because of habitat destruction and alteration. Blanding's turtles are considered imperiled or threatened in every location throughout their distribution except for Nebraska. The Sandhills provide a refuge for the species. There was a study done back in 2004 by Dr. Jeffrey Lang at Valentine National Wildlife Refuge, and that was the last in-depth study of Blanding's turtles. But he estimated that there was about 130,000 Blanding's turtles at the refuge alone. And so that would be the largest population of Blanding's turtles in the world.
These are just a record of our earlier project. We started in 2002. So I came back because I actually have a project going on in India. I haven't been able to go to India because of the whole COVID situation. And I thought, well, okay, I guess this is the time we go back to Valentine and see whether the turtles are still there. So it just happened to be approximately 2 decades or 20 years afterwards. One of the most dramatic things, I guess I've learned, is that nothing stays the same. So this place has changed. There's been an enormous increase just recently in the wetland habitats. It's kind of exciting because now, I'm getting a better sense of how adaptable this turtle is and how able the turtle is to utilize available wetlands. So with more wetlands, probably going to be more turtles. Turtle experts in the world would consider the Valentine Refuge a very special place because the importance of the refuge as a refuge for the Blanding's turtle. So even though the refuge was set up back in the day primarily for migratory waterfowl, there are many, many other incredibly valuable species of plants and animals that are here.
So we have here in the Sandhills a really precious resource that we need to protect, and it's also something that we need to research and understand so that we can help inform conservation management strategies for populations in other places of its distribution. Doesn't look like anyone's home.
The objective when I applied for my special use permit to come back to the refuge, and what was I going to do? I said, I hope we can catch some of the turtles we marked 20 years ago. Just guessing based on the data that we have so far, I think we're going to end up with a whole lot of younger turtles.
A stair step here.
Yeah. So see, this guy what was the weight on that one? 42, right? And most of these are less than 20 years old, which means they weren't around before. And so these are all new turtles. And we're marking them, I guess, because, I hope somebody will be able to follow up and find out what these turtles are doing maybe in another 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
They're a dream to work with, and I would love to continue working with them and be a Blanding's turtle expert.
Wetlands are super important. I mean, number one, water sustains life, but they become these little pockets of survival. We took a couple of temporary time-lapse cameras that had been up on a lake for quite a few years, and we put those in a couple different spots on the ranch, places that we haven't looked at in this way before. The time-lapse cameras that we've had on the ranch so far, they've been great tools. They've also just been a lot of fun.
But this is just a different way that future generations can look back and see what happened and what the previous generations did.
Wouldn't it be great to have a time-lapse camera 75, 80, 100 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
See what the country looked like,
Yeah.
what it looks like now.
Yeah, my parents love the time-lapse. Especially my dad, I would say, really gets a kick out of seeing these pictures. He's always really respected that line of communication and storytelling.
One of the reasons I really like them is because it lets the land tell its own story. It just stands as a testament to that change and how everything comes back around. So it shows dedication, and it shows that land stewardship, you're in it for the long haul. It's not an overnight thing. It's a multi-year process, and so I think having that testament there is really important.
We are going to party tomorrow. Tomorrow's the 4th of July, and my family tries to take 3 holidays and really say no work, let's do something fun. And that's 4th of July, Christmas, and Easter. So this is it till Christmas, people. We're going to live it up.
Good job,
Water is, that's part of our DNA, and so it's something that we gravitate towards anyways. And those special places on the ranch, that's where water is. That's where we gather, that's where we congregate. Those are the places that are the most special, the most sacred. So for the next generation coming up, we want them to have a true passion and love for the land like we do. So that only happens by being out on it, just spending time.
The ranchers, they're making their livelihood raising livestock. That's their economic driver. But it would be a mistake to just say that's all they focus on, because they have a tremendous love and respect for the land as well, and they pay attention to the wildlife and the plants and what's going on this landscape. It's part of their way of life, it's part of their culture to sustain these wetlands and these ranch lands.
Because it's more than a job. It's your life, but it's more than that. It's your relationships. It's what makes life meaningful. I think it's all those things, but at the same time, you do have to make a living. So you need to do it in a way that is economically viable, but ecologically sustainable. And that's a great challenge. What a fun challenge.
The alkaline lakes are in the far western region of Nebraska, and these lakes are characterized by really
really unusual chemistry. And so they tend to have high pH values. So drinking water out of the tap has a pH of about 7, and these lakes can have a pH of 9 to 11. These lakes are generally what are called closed basins. Most of them don't have an inflow and an outflow. And so as a result, as those water levels go down, they evaporate and they concentrate a lot of the minerals in the water, which contributes to the salinity and the alkalinity in these waters. We've been working here in the Alkaline Lakes area as part of a collaborative project with teams of researchers from across the University of Nebraska and other partners. And so these teams of scientists are interested in organisms that have characteristics or traits that allow them to adapt to conditions that a lot of other life cannot survive in. So there are a few things that I think are really special about the collaborative team that we have here. And I think one of them is that by bringing this group of experts together, it's really highlighted how much discovery there is still to be made. And I think that's one of my favorite parts of being a scientist and working in natural systems is that we're never finished knowing. In the state, there's a plan known as the Natural Legacy Project that has identified biologically unique landscapes. And alkaline lakes in particular are one of these biologically unique landscapes, and they have organisms and plant life that are not common in other parts of the state. These are just one of several kinds of unique landscapes that are really important to the overall diversity in Nebraska.
A botanist and a wetlands biologist could never be friends.
I thought this is why we had botanists. We wouldn't have to use, we just could ask you.
Here's Carrick's stubby eye that I just recalled from my...
Ted started working for Game and Parks a few years after I did. It's been over 20 years I've known Ted. Jerry is one of the fen experts in the state, and Jerry did a lot of work back in the early 90s, inventorying the fens throughout the Sandhills. A fen is a type of wetland that's fed by groundwater from below through artesian flow, and that water's been coming up for hundreds to thousands of years. So they're saturated wetlands with peat or muck soils. Yesterday we visited a couple different fens. So we visited the one here at Cottonwood-Steverson, spent some time out there, and then we went up to the John Ravenscroft Ranch, and John and his family took us out onto the fens there in the Boardman Creek Valley and walked out on that area where you can, it's almost like being on a trampoline. The vegetative mat shakes and quakes and moves around, or like, I think equated like a waterbed or something. It's moving around, and it's a really unique experience to be out on one of those. The plant life is unique. There's probably 15 or 20 species that are more northern species that probably got here during glacial times, and they survive on these cold, wet soils. A couple of the more showy wildflowers are bog bean and marsh marigold. Slender cotton grass. I'm a pretty big fan of cotton grasses. They're pretty cool. The plant I worry most about, there's two plants, reed canary grass, which is super aggressive, that just keeps spreading and spreading in the sandhills, and narrow-leaf cattail, which has taken over so many sandhill marshes just in the last 2 decades.
Prairie fringed orchid is a federally threatened species. It's a very unique flower, very cool flower. The plant has declined a lot because of how the meadows are used. Exotic plants like reed canary grass is really affecting it now. Its flowers have a very long nectar tube, so it's pollinated only by the night-flying sphinx moths. If anything affects those pollinators, it's also going to affect orchid reproduction. So our best chance to conserve the species is in the Sandhills. It's pretty well faded to oblivion in southeast Nebraska. The populations, even over my career, have disappeared. So the sandhill meadows are probably our last chance of really saving that species in Nebraska. I think people should know about nature, you know, the planet they live on, and fens are just part of that. Seems like every generation knows a little bit less and a little bit less about nature, are more disconnected from it. You have to get out and explore, so maybe they should go to fens. There's millions of other species in the world, and we never look at anything from the viewpoint of those other species. We always try to justify, well, how is something important for humans? And it kind of bothers me a lot of times. You know, can't we think about other species, giving them a place to live? You know, we kind of control the earth. So I always say, well, they're important because a lot of species live there and they need it. So for humans, our survival probably depends on keeping nature intact as best we can.